It's always fascinating to me how the crypto market reacts to news. One press release drops, one big partnership is announced, and suddenly Twitter and YouTube light up like a Christmas tree. Prices spike, influencers post victory laps, and analysts scramble to update their models. It's chaotic, it's messy, but it's also exactly what makes this space so addictive. And right now, if we're being real, Stellar XLM is at the center of a lot of that noise. Over the last couple of years, Stellar has quietly stacked up partnerships with some of the biggest names you can imagine: Visa, MasterCard, MoneyGram, Franklin Templeton, even NGOs like the UNHCR. These aren't little DeFi side projects. These are global brands, institutions with serious reputations. And every time Stellar announces one of these deals, it sets off a chain reaction across the market. So why do partnerships hit so hard? Let's break it down. First, partnerships are credibility signals. The crypto world is flooded with projects making big promises, but only a handful ever land serious partners. When a heavyweight like Visa or Franklin Templeton signs up to use Stellar's tech, that's a stamp of validation. It tells the market, this isn't just a speculative token. It's infrastructure good enough for Fortune 500 companies and financial giants. And credibility matters. Retail investors, institutions, even regulators pay attention to who a project is working with. Second, partnerships bring narrative fuel. Let's be honest, markets run on stories as much as they run on numbers. When Stellar links up with MoneyGram to revolutionize remittances, that's not just a technical update. It's a story people can latch onto. Migrant workers sending money home faster and cheaper, NGOs delivering aid instantly in crisis zones, tokenized assets moving on Stellar rails. These are real-world narratives. And narratives drive speculation because investors can picture the impact. They can say, oh, this isn't just crypto. This is changing lives. That's a powerful motivator. Third, partnerships suggest future demand. Even if the technical details take months or years to roll out, the market prices in potential. Think about it. If Franklin Templeton is issuing tokenized funds on Stellar, traders assume more institutions will follow. If Visa is testing cross-border settlements with Stellar, analysts project volumes that dwarf anything happening today. That forward-looking pricing creates volatility, spikes when optimism runs hot, dips when reality sets in. And let's not forget the psychological side. Investors love external validation. When influencers shout, Visa is using Stellar, it creates FOMO. People don't want to miss the next big thing. And in crypto, fear of missing out is one of the strongest market forces we've got. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Partnerships affect different groups differently. Analysts look at them through a long-term lens. They'll ask, how will this impact network usage? Will it increase transaction volumes? Does it improve liquidity for XLM? Influencers, on the other hand, lean into the excitement. They'll post thumbnails with rocket emojis and titles like, Stellar is about to explode. And in between those two poles, you've got retail investors trying to figure out which narrative to trust. Let's look at 2025 specifically. This year, Stellar has been riding waves of news that have kept analysts and influencers busier than ever. The Protocol 23 upgrade improved scalability and performance. Analysts loved that. Visa and MasterCard expanding their pilot integrations. Influencers couldn't stop hyping it. Franklin Templeton deepening its tokenization work on Stellar. That lit up both sides because institutions plus blockchain is still the holy grail of credibility. The reaction patterns are almost predictable at this point. News drops, influencers hype it, retail piles in price spikes. Analysts publish cautious breakdowns, price retraces. Rinse and repeat. And the beauty is, everyone plays their role. Analysts keep the discourse grounded, influencers keep the energy high, and the market just does what it does best. Overreact in both directions. Now, you might ask, why does Stellar specifically get this kind of attention? After all, lots of blockchains announce partnerships. The difference with Stellar is that its partnerships aren't vaporware. They're not hypothetical collaborations with tiny startups. These are established players, and they're already piloting or deploying real-world use cases. That's why reactions are sharper, because people know there's actual substance here. There's also a unique dynamic with Stellar's branding. Unlike some chains that market themselves heavily, Stellar tends to stay low-key. So when news does break, it feels bigger. It's like the quiet kid in the class suddenly dropping a brilliant answer. Everyone pays attention. That understated approach makes each announcement pop louder in the narrative space. And of course, we can't ignore timing. 2025 has been a roller coaster for crypto markets in general. Between regulatory shifts, ETF approvals, and the broader macroeconomic climate, investors are hypersensitive to anything that smells like adoption. Partnerships fit that bill perfectly. They're tangible signs of progress in a market that often feels like it's running on vibes. So, Section 1 is really about setting the stage, understanding why partnerships matter, why they move prices, and why analysts and influencers react the way they do. Stellar's role in this is unique because it has positioned itself at the intersection of credibility, narrative, and utility. And that makes every announcement not just a headline, but a potential catalyst. And here's the kicker, the reactions don't just shape price action. They shape perception. Analysts frame Stellar as a steady, institution-friendly blockchain. Influencers frame it as the next rocket ship. Put those together, and you've got a market narrative that can sustain both cautious optimism and wild speculation. That duality is part of why Stellar's story resonates so strongly right now. Now let's get into the really fun part, the market's reaction. Because partnerships on their own are one thing. You can sign all the MOUs you want, but if the market doesn't believe in the long-term value, the price barely moves. Stellar is a bit of a strange case here. Every time a new partnership drops, Visa, MoneyGram, Franklin Templeton, or even NGO integrations, you see these little bursts of optimism. Analysts start tweeting threads, influencers start pumping their takes on YouTube or TikTok, and suddenly, Stellar is back on everyone's radar. But what's interesting is how different groups interpret the same news. On the analyst side, there's a lot more caution. Traditional market researchers and crypto data firms tend to frame XLM as an infrastructure play. They're not hyping it like a meme coin that's going to moon tomorrow. Instead, they highlight that Stellar's partnerships are with serious organizations, regulated, global, and very legacy-driven. Analysts often point out that every one of these partnerships validates Stellar's tech stack. Visa doesn't integrate just any blockchain. Franklin Templeton isn't tokenizing funds on a whim. These companies are methodical, conservative, and risk-averse. So when they move with Stellar, it signals long-term trust. The takeaway from the analyst camp is usually, yes, these partnerships matter, but don't expect fireworks overnight. The price impact will be gradual, not explosive. Now, influencers, completely different energy. Many of them live off hype cycles, so when Stellar announces something new, the thumbnails start rolling in, XLMTO $10? Or, Stellar about to flip Ripple? They lean into speculation because that's what drives clicks. But to be fair, some influencers are genuinely impressed by Stellar's consistency. They talk about how the project doesn't chase headlines every week, but when it does make an announcement, it's something concrete. A lot of them point out that while other cryptos are losing credibility with regulators, Stellar is moving the opposite direction, gaining credibility through its real-world use cases. One example that stood out in early 2025 was when Stellar doubled down on real-world asset tokenization with Franklin Templeton and extended its MoneyGram partnership. Analysts were cautious, saying, "This confirms Stellar's trajectory." Meanwhile, influencers were all over it, saying, "This is the moment institutions pour into Stellar." You had a split. One side treating it as a validation, the other treating it as a breakout trigger. Both perspectives add to the momentum, but they feed different audiences. The cautious investor sees Stellar as a slow and steady infrastructure win. The hype-driven trader sees it as a rocket ship waiting to launch. And then you've got the retail crowd caught in between. They're influenced by both. Analysts' reports get summarized on Twitter threads, while influencers pump their takes with energy and excitement. The result? Volatility. You'll see a 10% move up on the day of the news, then some retracement as the cautious voices pull people back to reality. But here's the kicker. Even with those swings, Stellar's overall trajectory has been trending upward because the news flow isn't fluff. It's foundational. What I love about this split reaction is that it creates a kind of ecosystem. Analysts provide the steady, measured arguments that attract institutional money. Influencers generate the excitement that keeps retail engaged. Together, they form a feedback loop. When a partnership is announced, influencers amplify it, price pops, analysts validate it with reports, price stabilizes, then the cycle repeats with the next announcement. Stellar thrives in that cycle because its news isn't empty promises. It's backed by real-world integrations. By 2025, this has become even more apparent. Analysts are starting to upgrade Stellar in their long-term forecasts. They're not saying $10 tomorrow, but they're openly acknowledging that Stellar is in the top tier of blockchain projects making a real-world dent. Influencers, on the other hand, are doubling down on narratives like the Ripple alternative or the underdog ready to shock the market. And let's be real, both sides are kind of right. If you zoom out, these reactions matter beyond just the day-to-day charts. They shape perception. The cautious validation from analysts reassures institutions and keeps Stellar from being written off as a speculative coin. The loud, hype-driven takes from influencers keep Stellar visible to everyday traders who might otherwise ignore it in favor of flashier tokens. That balance is why Stellar's price, even with all the volatility, has managed to hold a steady upward trajectory with every major partnership announcement. And maybe that's the bigger lesson here. Markets don't move just on fundamentals or just on hype. They move on the interplay between the two. Stellar sits at a unique crossroads where it's not flashy enough to live off hype alone, but it's also not boring enough to be ignored. Analysts give it backbone, influencers give it flair, and together, they create an environment where Stellar's steady progress actually translates into price action. So whenever someone says, partnerships don't matter until they move the charts, Stellar might just be the counterexample. They do move the charts, maybe not in meme coin style, but in a way that builds long-term trust and credibility. And if you're paying attention, that slow grind is often more powerful than any moonshot spike. Let's zoom out and talk about the bigger picture, because while the short-term spikes and pullbacks are fun to watch, what really matters is how these narratives build long-term confidence in Stellar. And this is where the split between analysts and influencers actually starts working in Stellar's favor in ways people don't always notice. Think about it. Crypto is still a trust game. It doesn't matter how slick your tech is or how loud your community gets. If investors, both retail and institutional, don't trust the story, the project eventually fizzles out. Stellar's strength isn't that it has the loudest community or the flashiest token moves. Its strength is that it has managed to stitch together a credibility narrative across multiple layers of the market. Analysts, influencers, institutions, and retail, they're all playing different roles in creating that narrative. From the analyst side, confidence builds slowly. They're constantly revisiting Stellar's fundamentals: scalability, throughput, real-world partnerships, regulatory alignment. Every time a new partnership rolls in, whether it's Visa testing on Stellar rails, MoneyGram scaling remittances, or Franklin Templeton doubling down on tokenized funds, analysts update their models. They might not come out screaming 10x incoming, but they do adjust Stellar upward in terms of long-term viability. That matters because institutional players, hedge funds, asset managers, even family offices rely on these reports to justify allocation. When analysts say, "Look, Stellar has proven it can work with Fortune 500s and NGOs alike," it starts to feel less like a risky bet and more like a reasonable exposure in a diversified portfolio. On the influencer side, the impact is different but equally important. They keep Stellar top of mind for retail investors who aren't going to sit down and read a 50-page market research PDF. They frame Stellar in language that feels urgent, emotional, and engaging. Whether you agree with their takes or not, they create energy. And that energy sustains retail participation. Even if half the audience just shows up for the hype, a portion of them sticks around, learns about Stellar's fundamentals, and becomes long-term holders. It's almost like influencers act as a noisy funnel, pulling people in with excitement, then filtering out the ones who take the time to dig deeper. Together, this balance creates a multi-speed confidence cycle. Institutions move slowly but steadily, adding exposure as the analyst reports validate the fundamentals. Retail swings more wildly, but influencers ensure that Stellar never fades into obscurity during quiet periods. The net effect? Stellar's price chart might not look like a rocket ship, but it also doesn't collapse into irrelevance. It has a heartbeat, steady, resilient, and reinforced by different layers of trust. What's fascinating is how this layered confidence has started to reshape Stellar's reputation in 2025. For years, people compared Stellar to Ripple, often dismissing it as the quieter sibling. But now you're seeing a shift. Ripple is still fighting regulatory perception battles, while Stellar is stacking credibility points. NGOs trust it. Global fintechs trust it. Even some central banks are looking at it for pilot projects. Analysts notice that. Influencers notice that. And slowly, the broader market starts to see Stellar less as the underdog and more as a legitimate contender for mainstream adoption. Let's be real, crypto markets have burned people before. Overpromising and underdelivering has been the theme for too many projects. That's why credibility is currency in 2025. And Stellar, by consistently showing up with real partnerships, is building exactly that. Every headline from analysts reinforces the idea that Stellar isn't just hype. Every video from influencers reminds people that Stellar is still alive and moving. And when you combine those two, you get something powerful. Investors who start to believe Stellar has staying power. This matters for long-term holders. A coin doesn't need to moon overnight if you believe it'll be more valuable 5 years from now because institutions are integrating it into their pipelines. Analysts' cautious optimism gives that belief rational grounding. Influencers' energy gives it emotional resonance. It's the combination of head and heart, logic and hype, that sustains confidence in a market as volatile as crypto. And don't underestimate perception. In crypto, price doesn't just reflect fundamentals. It shapes them. When Stellar holds its ground during broader market sell-offs, people notice. When partnerships translate into measurable adoption, analysts can point to actual on-chain activity. That, in turn, convinces more institutions to pay attention. And when influencers amplify those stories, retail starts seeing Stellar as less of a gamble and more of a hidden gem worth holding. In a way, this is Stellar's secret weapon. It doesn't rely on one type of narrative to carry it forward. Instead, it has a diverse ecosystem of voices, from conservative analysts to hyped-up influencers, all pushing the same coin, albeit in different tones. The result is a confidence that's harder to shake. It's not a cult of personality like you see around some meme coins. It's not just institutional FOMO like you see with Bitcoin ETFs. It's a layered, multi-voiced narrative that makes Stellar feel grounded and exciting at the same time. So if you're looking at Stellar's long-term potential, the lesson is clear. Don't underestimate the power of narrative balance. Analysts keep it serious. Influencers keep it lively. And together, they build a kind of market psychology where people believe Stellar is both a safe bet and an exciting bet. That belief is what drives capital, sustains adoption, and, eventually, shows up in the charts. Alright, so let's tie this together and push the conversation into the future, because where Stellar goes next is what really has everyone's attention. Analysts, influencers, and even skeptics are all circling around the same question. We see the partnerships. We see the incremental price action. But can Stellar actually scale this momentum into something bigger? Something that cements its place in the crypto ecosystem long-term? That's the million-dollar question, right? And depending on who you ask, the answers can sound wildly different. Analysts give you the slow and steady breakdown, influencers fire up their audiences with bold predictions, and investors themselves are left trying to piece together a coherent outlook. But what's interesting, and honestly kind of rare in crypto, is that both groups are converging on the idea that Stellar isn't just another speculative token. It's something with a durable future. And in a space where projects can vanish overnight, that perception is gold. Let's unpack this by looking at the big themes shaping the next leg of Stellar's journey. First up, partnership momentum. Analysts have been very clear on this. The partnerships Stellar has lined up aren't one-off press releases. These are multi-year, infrastructure-level deals with real companies and organizations. Think Visa, MoneyGram, Franklin Templeton, and NGO partnerships with UNHCR and Mercy Corps. These aren't fly-by-night crypto experiments. They're serious players who have tested Stellar's rails, found them functional, and are integrating them into actual workflows. Analysts point out that every additional partnership reduces Stellar's risk profile. The logic is simple. If Fortune 500 companies and global NGOs are betting their reputation on Stellar, it's unlikely the project collapses into irrelevance. That alone makes institutional investors take it seriously. Influencers, of course, spin this differently. They'll say, look, if Visa and MoneyGram are here now, what's next? MasterCard? Stripe? Central banks. They frame partnerships as dominoes, where each new one triggers speculation about the next. And while that hype can sound exaggerated, it does its job. It keeps Stellar relevant in the conversation, keeps retail holders excited about what's coming down the line, and that anticipation feeds into steady demand, which, let's be honest, is part of why Stellar's chart looks more resilient than people expect in a volatile market. The second theme, scalability and execution. Partnerships are only as good as the infrastructure they're built on. Analysts stress this point constantly. They'll note that Stellar's upgrades, like Protocol 23 and its focus on smart contracts and scalability, are critical for sustaining all these use cases. Without that tech evolution, partnerships could stall. Influencers, meanwhile, simplify this for their audiences. Stellar is evolving. It's not the same blockchain it was 5 years ago. It's growing to handle bigger things. And again, both views matter. Institutions want reassurance that Stellar's tech won't break under pressure. Retail just wants to know that Stellar isn't standing still. Together, those narratives build confidence that Stellar can deliver not just today, but tomorrow. The third theme, and maybe the most important in 2025, is regulatory positioning. Analysts highlight that Stellar is playing the compliance game smartly. It's working with NGOs, it's integrating with financial giants, and it's leaning into use cases that governments can't easily oppose, like remittances and humanitarian aid. That makes it a safer bet for long-term exposure. Influencers package this as, Stellar is winning where others are fighting regulators. It's a sharp, simple narrative, and it resonates, especially when you compare it to projects still mired in lawsuits or uncertainty. The takeaway is that Stellar feels like a safe harbor in a stormy regulatory climate, and that's a confidence boost for investors across the board. So what does all of this mean for long-term confidence? It means Stellar is building a 3-layered trust structure. Analysts validate it logically, influencers sell it emotionally, and partnerships prove it practically. That's the trifecta most crypto projects never achieve. And the result is a coin that feels both credible and exciting, a rare balance in this market. Now, let's talk perception again, because in markets, perception often precedes reality. If investors believe Stellar is becoming a key player, they position accordingly. Analysts reinforce this by slowly raising price targets or highlighting Stellar in institutional reports. Influencers amplify it by plastering YouTube with bullish titles. And before long, even skeptics start to admit that Stellar has staying power. That perception attracts more capital, which feeds into adoption, which eventually justifies the perception. It's a loop, and right now, Stellar is caught in a very favorable version of it. But here's the nuance that both analysts and influencers often agree on. Stellar isn't going to be a moon overnight coin. It's not Dogecoin. It's not Shiba. This path is steadier, more deliberate. The wild volatility will always be there. It's crypto after all, but the underlying trend is one of gradual upward momentum tied to real-world adoption. And honestly, that might be even better, because hype cycles crash hard, but steady growth creates confidence that lasts. The long-term investor takeaway is this: Stellar is positioning itself not just as a blockchain project, but as infrastructure for global finance and humanitarian impact. That's not a small ambition. That's a role that could make it a backbone player in the space. Analysts know it, influencers feel it, and retail investors, the ones who stick around, are starting to believe it too. So, let's wrap this with a forward-looking thought. The next year or two will be critical for Stellar. The partnerships are in place, the upgrades are rolling out, and the narratives are converging. If Stellar continues to execute, scaling its tech, deepening its integrations, and navigating regulations smoothly, it won't just ride the crypto cycle. It'll outlast it. That's the difference between being a speculative asset and being a foundational one. And for those watching from the sidelines, the message is simple. Don't underestimate the power of credibility in a market built on trust. Stellar has it. It's earning more of it every day. And in a space where so many projects fade into obscurity, that credibility could be the key to making Stellar one of the defining stories of this cycle. So here's my challenge to you. Take a hard look at how analysts are framing Stellar. Listen to the influencers hyping it up. Compare the two. Somewhere in between, you'll find the truth. And it's a truth that suggests Stellar is building something bigger than most people realize. If you've been nodding along with this, then you already get it. Stellar's journey isn't about the noise. It's about the signal. And the signal is clear. This is a project worth paying attention to, not just today, but for the long haul. And before you click away, let me leave you with this. Share this breakdown with someone who only thinks crypto is about hype. Drop a comment with your own take. Do you lean more toward the analyst's cautious optimism or the influencer's bold excitement? And of course, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next deep dive. Because trust me, Stellar's story is far from over. In fact, it might just be getting started.